Hello and welcome back to Historical Humans Podcast. It is Black History Month, though we thought we'd bring you something a little bit different here. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about the Tulsa Race Massacre, and I'm joined by my wonderful co-hosts, Colum Coleman and Gwendolyn Allen, and my name is Justin Woods. And Colum, do you just want to jump right into it? Tell us, what is this whole thing about? Give us the background.
All right. The Tulsa Race Riot, or Tulsa Massacre, as it is alternatively known, was it was an act of racially motivated violence in what is going to be one of our more solemn episodes here today. It was conducted against the people of Tulsa, Oklahoma, a small all-black community that, despite the economic impacts of segregation, or perhaps because of it, managed to prosper. This obviously did not sit well with the neighboring white communities, who spent a lot of time looking for an excuse to vent their frustrations. The massacre occurred in 1921, but the town had existed for a good deal of time before that. Excuse me. It was founded in 1906 by a man named O.W. Gurley, who was a wealthy black business owner who purchased 40 acres of land and decided to build a community there for those fleeing from racial persecution from throughout the United States, mostly former slaves from the Civil War and sharecroppers from the South. Sharecropping is effectively what you do when you want to own slaves but can't legally call them slaves, where you essentially give someone land to rent and crops to grow there, but then tax them more than it costs to live there in order to grow the crops.
Effectively the same thing as feudalism that was rampant during Europe in the 1400s all the way up to the 1800s.
Yep. It's feudalism. It's the same system the British used to create the potato famine. It's a very effective tool for brutalizing a population.
It also is referred to as indentured servitude, where you basically set it up the system. You say, okay, you're not a slave. I am paying you to work here. However, you're going to pay to live on this land. You're going to pay to work on this land. And effectively, the costs outweigh the money you make.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
this was also used for other racial minority groups across America, Hawaii, down into South America, specifically on like sugar plantations and coffee plantations as well. So we see this throughout history.
Fun fact, and I actually think we should probably do an episode on this or on unions in general, but it's actually one of the tactics that a lot of mining companies used to their mining towns and mining populations. Instead of actually paying them in real currency, they paid them in these coins that they could exchange at the town commissary for items, to basically dissuade anyone from trying to quit the companies, because you would have to your money would be useless. All your savings would be useless because it's only valid in this town with this company.
So
Yeah.
naturally, with sharecropping, if you could get out, you did, because it's it's effectively hell.
Yeah, and it's very hard to get away from it, which is why a lot of people were fleeing.
Yeah, and so Tulsa became a haven for people who were trying to get away from those practices. Yep.
Specifically, the Greenwood neighborhood in Tulsa. So Tulsa's a big city. Specifically, the Greenwood neighborhood was that 40 acres in Tulsa that was known as Black Wall Street.
Yeah, it became known as Black Wall Street, also Black Utopia. It was it encompasses 35 square blocks. So this was not a small town by any means, or a small segment of Tulsa. This was a fairly large, thriving community.
And it was one of the few areas in the U.S. where black businesses, homeowners, and civic leaders thrived. Like,
Yep.
this was the area where African Americans can go to succeed.
And it was considered one of the most prosperous neighborhoods in America, barring black or white. So, it was a major staple of wealth and I guess capitalism, which
Yeah.
being the black neighborhood did not sit well with a lot of the white counterparts.
Yeah.
Which I think that's something we should briefly touch upon, of like Oklahoma as a whole in that area, because Colum mentioned that a lot of these people are former slaves, former sharecroppers, but also Oklahoma was home to a large number of indigenous populations, previously being the Indian Territory. And then you've got this influx of white former slave owners taking up land in the state. So you've got basically these three separate groups and a lot of segregation between them.
Yes, in 1907, just a year after the Greenwood neighborhood is bought by Mr. Gurley, uh, the Indian Territories becomes the state of Oklahoma. And when statehood is implemented, laws for segregation are put into place and massively enforced just across the state. And Tulsa Greenwood and Tulsa prospers in part because of these laws. They actually turn it to their advantage as the people of Tulsa, as they begin to make money and have some success, they don't go into the rest of Tulsa. The people of Greenwood don't go into the rest of Tulsa to spend their money. They spend it in their community. So as the various businesses that they set up make money, those employees spend the money in the town. And this sort of starts to become a self-fulfilling prophecy where they just, things just keep getting better and better for them. Well, the rest of Tulsa, which is tied into essentially the American economic system, rises and falls, and, a lot with, they end up doing a lot better than the rest of Tulsa, the people in Greenwood.
Which,
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to mention that Gurley also sold land to other African Americans. So it became populated exclusively by Black business owners and homeowners. So you also have the owning of land and those rights, which also leads to generational wealth, as we've seen throughout history. So that is something that's also very important.
Yes,
Well,
Gurley did something that is very much a kindness for someone in his position, where he actually sold the land and not just the rights to build property on the land. It seems that he very much did not want to recreate the system that he and other African Americans were fleeing from, with himself at the top. He didn't sort of emulate the sharecropper style of organization where there's one landowner and everyone else rents off of him. He actually just sold the parcels of land back to other members of the community to do what they were going to do with.
Well, and that, tied with the segregation, led to it becoming its own kind of independent and insular community within Tulsa. I mean, they even had their own school systems, public services, separate from the rest of Tulsa. As awful of a situation as it was, they definitely made the best of it, and they, what normally is a detriment to an African American community, in this case, succeeded.
The town grew to 11,000 people by the year of the massacre. So in just 15 years, from 1906 to 1921, the town grew from one man buying 40,000 acres to 11,000 people.
Yeah.
Or 40 acres. I can't speak numbers anymore. 40,000 acres would be hilarious.
It's okay. Numbers are hard.
There's a lot of math on my sheets in front of me right now. It is not fun.
But because of that, it became an economic powerhouse. I mean, the people spent their money where they lived. There were a lot of luxury shops that popped up. I mean, it was entirely reinvested by its citizens. They put their money into their community. And it's interesting to see, because that kind of self-reinvestment really prospered for the community.
Yeah, and we see we're gonna go through some of the people that owned shops and what they did in Greenwood, and you'll see a lot of these people have multiple businesses, so they run multiple things. So people were kind of like wearing a bunch of different hats to make this community thrive and to really like kind of diverse their portfolio to talk like a business person for a second.
Gotta
So
diversify the portfolios.
yeah. So you'll see like Simon Barry, he mastermind a nickel per ride Genty service, which is a type of like shared cab company. He ran a bus line, he ran a boutique hotel, and he ran a charter plane service. And this is all one man.
Yeah, Ginty is essentially Uber before Uber existed, because essentially what it is one cab car goes around and it picks up people as it makes its circuit, and just people get in and out of the car and go places. You can tell it where to go, but it's going to stop and pick people up along the way.
Which also just like shows how like safe the community members felt to even like be okay with that. I don't know if that was like something that was widespread, but like that gives me anxiety. But you know, it would seem that you know people felt really safe in an all Black community that was you know very well funded and trusting of members, because I feel like this is probably one of the first places where they are really treated with respect, you know, not only as humans, but as entrepreneurs that, you know, had the investments to be made and the capability to do it.
Yeah, and to speak of investments, this man, Simon Barry, he ran a plane service, an airplane. The airplane was a very recent invention in the early 20th century. So to essentially have made enough money to have bought an airplane and then fly people to places in it as a charter plane service, that is that's huge. That's it's a brand new technology, and this neighborhood is able to invest in it for itself.
Yeah. And then the ability to learn how to use it, because that's also like a knowledge that can be very restricted. And a lot of people today don't even know how to fly a plane.
Yeah. I personally think World War One may have helped with that a little bit, just because there was an Air Force for World War One, and the United States of America, along with many other countries, tends to suddenly forget racial or ethnic prejudice when it's fighting for its existence.
Except for when it sends predominantly African American units to the front lines. But we can have revisionist history if we want.
Well, no, it tends to forget that we don't want those folk here when folk need to do dying. Then suddenly it's you're one of us now. Get to the front.
Well, speaking of being useful when there is a certain need arising, that leads to Dr. A.C. Jackson, who was a prominent physician that actually transcended the color barrier. He served not only African American clients but also white clients. So it's like, if you could provide a service and a value to people, they tend to forget that there's a certain distinction between you.
And just imagine just how good of a doctor he would have to be to transcend the color barrier, because these are incredibly racist white people having a person they think less of perform a highly educated, very specific role.
Well, that's why he was named the best Black physician in America by the Mayo Brothers. And that name sounds kind of familiar. What would they be known for, Colum?
It's
not your sandwich, Justin. It's not your
I was literally going to make a joke about pasty white people, and I thought against it.
The Mayo Brothers were the founders of something called the Mayo Clinic and the Mayo Foundation for Medical Education and Research. The Mayo Family was essentially a group of celebrity physicians that operated out of the U.S. for 3 consecutive generations. So they were very wealthy, very well-renowned, very famous doctors who built a lot of essentially built a lot of foundations for medical science, and for them to recognize a African American as one of, if not the best doctor in the United States. Because personally, I feel putting black in front of the best doctor in America is just a qualifier from the times. Like I don't think he was necessarily the best black doctor. I think it's probably more along the lines of best doctor, but we can't say that because it's 1920.
Now, were they known for their sandwiches? I have to know.
No, and I'm going to take you to the South Sandwich Islands and leave you there. Because by that logic, the entire island chain should be edible.
I'll do it myself if I have to.
Oh my gosh. So to get back on track, and not sandwiches, there was John and Lula Williams that launched a theater, a confectionery shop, which I love the name rather than candy shop. It sounds so cool. A rooming house, which is kind of like an apartment with a shared kitchen and bathrooms, and then a garage for mechanics to work out of. So they like a lot of hands on a lot of different pots.
Yeah, and just so we don't have to play catch up after the previous set of puns, I'd like to also bring into this Mabel B. Little, which is personally a very fun name that we found, who established a what was an extremely popular beauty salon in Tulsa.
And then there's
I kind of just wanted to mention that, like, we also see like women owning their own businesses, which is another big thing as well. Not just in these racial lines, but we also have gender lines that we're working over.
Yeah, granted, Mabel was a woman running a beauty salon, but it's still a female business owner.
Yeah, no, we respect the hustle. We respect the female business owners, the women out there who run it. Doesn't matter if it's a beauty salon, if it's a theater company, a confectionery, like, you go, girl. I was going to segue into E.W. Woods. No relation there, but, I figured it'd be an honorable mention. Who was, in 1913, was the first principal of the all-black Booker T. Washington High School. Nicknamed the quintessential Tulsan. Title was given because of his great leadership in public education. Like, because there were a lot of civic leaders who really did a good job trying to raise the students and really give the best education possible.
Yeah, Greenwood in Tulsa was essentially it was in many ways ahead of many other things, not just in the surrounding state of Oklahoma, but in most of the United States as well. It was African Americans who were far ahead of the curve in most other communities.
Yeah, there is actually a gallery dedication in, I believe it's Oklahoma State, for a memorial. His name is Ellis Walker Woods, not just like E.W. Woods. And there's a whole, backstory to how influential he was as a principal and in the community that people can go visit and see.
That's incredible.
So now to the kind of sullen part of today's topic. It's great to talk about all the amazing people that were a part of Greenwood, but now we have to talk about the massacre and what started it and when it happened and these kind of escalations that kind of burn this neighborhood to the ground. So it is called the Tulsa Race Riot, aka the Tulsa Massacre. It obviously occurred in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It occurred on May 31st, and it lasted until June 1st. It left anywhere between 30 to 300 dead. And you have this disparity because it wasn't really acknowledged or covered or investigated when it happened. It wasn't till later that people actually, it was like, we have to investigate this. We have to see what happened. And we'll go over it a little bit later, but, there were mass graves that were found and dug up. So,
Not dug up. They were found, but they have not been
oh, not dug up. Sorry.
excavated. They look mass graves were found about 100 years later, almost by some investigatory committees using ground penetrating radar.
Okay, that's what it is.
But they did not dig up the graves as of yet.
I do want to make an amendment too to what you were saying, Gwen. I know we're gonna come back to it, but to say it wasn't investigated till much later, it was 1997 when they formed the commission to start investigating. Like it was
much later.
It took almost
not just like a couple years, like decades.
Yeah. It was a lifetime later, and the reason the initial count says the minimum is 30 is because that's what they reported when they kind of didn't want to admit that Greenwood existed. So you can't kill people that don't exist, apparently.
Well, and these were mostly African Americans, so a lot of police and institutions didn't really care, and kind of wanted to sweep it under the rug, which is, I think, a little hard to do with the way that the mayor took actions, but we'll get into that.
The police did some of the killing.
Not only the police, but the National Guard when they got called in.
Oh yeah, we'll get into more of that later.
Sorry.
This is the summary section here.
But beyond the dead, there were also over 800 injured and over 183 serious injured. Now, these, again, are estimates to the best of the knowledge, so they're not 100% accurate, but we talked about there's 11,000 people in Greenwood. To say that 1,100 of them right off the bat either died or had a pretty nasty injury, that's strikingly high, no matter what group or area you're talking.
Yeah, the estimates is that 10,000 people were left homeless in Tulsa, which, given the fact that we know that Greenwood had 11,000 people, kind of tells you something about the number of people who made it out. How many or didn't make it out, I should say.
Well, there was 1,400 homes and businesses that were burned, and that included the dozens of churches, the school, the hospital. Who burns a hospital unless you're actively out to seek harm?
It's like horrible racist people.
Yeah, it's like the sick, elderly, and injured. Yes, those are the people we have a problem with. Let's destroy the hospital.
Which I want to point out, even in warfare, they tend to avoid the medical tents and the medical hospitals out of
courtesy.
Yes, basically.
Oh yeah, everything on this list here, the churches, the schools, the hospitals, the public libraries, everything on this little list in front of you, every single one of those buildings, with the possible exception of the library, to target that building is a war crime.
Yes.
Well, the library holds a bunch of information.
But I mean, this is an atrocity of itself to what they did, and then adding up all these things that are actual war crimes, and the fact that Black Wall Street and this massacre is not talked about in our history books is a crime and an injustice. And
not to stand on a soapbox, but there's people who are actively trying to revise history and remove these topics from history, and there's a lot of legislation out there to try and remove these kinds of topics from being taught. And it just history that is gone unlearned goes to repeat itself. Like history repeats itself if you don't learn it.
Yeah. And to put the cost of or the damage that this thing did, in case human lives and property destruction and war crimes just don't quite seem to do it for you in our wonderfully hyper-capitalistic society here. The total damages that were filed following this incident, as some resources so lovingly put it, was for $1.4 million in 1921 money, which today translates for $25 million in 2022 money. And I would like to point out that of that 1.4 million that was filed, not a single insurance company paid a cent, because every single insurance claim at that time had a riot clause that basically amounted to, if white people don't like you and burn your house down, you get nothing.
Isn't that just beautiful? Like,
Yep.
I mean, I hate insurance companies today, but
yeah, the insurance company, we are not liable for damages caused by mob violence and mob actions. And it's the riot clauses. And it's like, that really only ever kicks in one scenario.
Yeah, they wrote it with a specific purpose. And that's also the reason why the riot wasn't talked about in history books until the late 90s. And even then, that's when the commission was formed to document the incident. Like, to have such a violent and atrocious incident go unrecorded, undocumented, and yeah, I'm going to go out there and say fuck those insurance companies. Just 100%.
I mean, I think that's something we can collectively all agree upon. Even if you aren't like aligning with today's topic, like most people hate insurance companies. Granted, I think you should align with this topic, and
that's why we're talking about it.
But
redlining is bad enough. Now we're going to destroy your home and tell you it's your fault.
Yes.
But now the incident, the build up to the incident, the day is May 30th, 1921. A young Dick Rowland, who is an African-American shoe shiner, meets Sarah Page, a white elevator operator. Rowland is accused of assaulting Page in an elevator in downtown Tulsa. Rowland was arrested. However, there was little evidential proof. Rowland entered Page's elevator in the Drexel building of downtown Tulsa. Sometime after that, Page screamed. Rowland fled the scene and police are called. Continue?
I was just jumping like, that's right. All it took to get Mr. Rowland arrested, who is 16 at this time, was he was in the vicinity of a white woman who screamed. People saw him leaving the area of a white woman who screamed, and that's it. That's all you needed to arrest this man.
And
oh, go ahead, Justin.
I was just going to say, I'm not saying that this incident is even related to that. However, there are noted and very notable incidents where a false crime is reported because of racist means or because of, whatever it is. One of the notable ones that jumps to my mind is Emmett Till.
Yeah, we see a history of white women, kind of weaponizing their gender and their race against Black men. There's always a weird kind of conversation in line you have to do with false accusations, especially in the case of assault. But historically, we have seen specifically with white women and Black men and younger Black men. We also have to remember that Emmett Till was also very young. He was a child when this happened. So, it doesn't take a lot to set people off, but when you read this, there are red flags of the situation.
Yeah, and I will say the one thing I can say in the defense of Sarah Page is that the sources that I found looking through this, they never state that she accuses Mr. Rowland of anything. It never says Sarah Page accuses Dick Rowland of anything. The newspapers accuse him of crime. He's the only thing that I found with her is that she screams. Dick Rowland is seen leaving the area, and that is enough to arrest him. And by the next day, the newspaper has somehow come up with a story of violence and rape by this 16-year-old boy.
Not to mention, they also announced a lynching planned for that night.
Oh, yeah.
So they were... The newspaper was the judge, jury, and executioner in this case. Mainly the executioner. Like, yeah, we wrote this story. Now let's go kill the fucking guy. Like...
Yep. Yeah.
It's just, again, like weaponizing white women fear, even if it's not the woman herself, because everyone loves to kind of call to justice for, you know,
The
these women,
damsel
as
in
they're
distress.
they're an excuse, you know,
Yeah.
for a lot of, you know, white male anger or just white anger in general.
Yeah, yeah. For all we know, Sarah Page could have seen a mouse.
Yeah.
Like, for all we know, that's the incident. Um, that night or the next night on May 31st, mobs of both African Americans and white people arrive at the place where Rolland is held, the white people to murder him, and the black people to protect a member of the Greenwood community and one of their own.
Yeah.
Because when you literally publish, we're not letting this go to trial, we're killing him tonight, what do you expect to happen?
You tell people
Yeah.
to amass on a certain day at a certain time in a certain location, you tend to cause an insurrection.
Yeah.
To use a very loaded word in 2022.
Anyway, so the mobs form and police actively refuse to tell anyone to go home. They stand by and do nothing and essentially just let everything that we're about to talk about happen.
Well, and of course, with the two competing factions, anger arises, sparks flare, and an armed African American man killed a white man.
Yep.
You know, shots are fired, and we honestly don't know what happened. I don't think there are really any like accurate accounts. Colin, correct me if I'm wrong.
There are the accounts are largely not contradictory, but they are considered relatively unreliable simply because of the fact that it was at the very least 76 years later that anyone was allowed to talk about it. And thus, most of the people who survived, who were around at that time, were young children during the incident, and it is considered somewhat unreliable. However, what I have written down for us to talk about is largely the facts that are agreed upon across most, if not all, accounts.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'll point out that is considered slightly controversial is why the African American shot the white person. There are two explanations. One is that the white person was trying to force his way into the place where Dick Rolland was held to get him out for the lynching. Another is that the white guy grabbed his gun and the gun went off. So, either way, not really a good look for the white mob here, because either you're actively trying to kill a child or you're trying to rip a gun out of a man's hand and it goes off.
Yeah.
Both of which, one of which is incredibly evil, the other incredibly stupid.
Yeah, there's no good look to that. No matter how you try and cut that cake, it's gonna come off.
Yeah. So it's like, I didn't mark it down on the sheet that we have here as talking points simply because I tried to keep all the controversies out of it.
But
Yeah.
naturally,
You know,
the mob responds.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about and not just saying like an armed, you know, black man kills a white man, because I feel like people are going to jump to their own conclusions about why that happened. So, and just talking about, okay, but why did this happen? What actually happened with it?
Yeah, and what is written there
the accounts
is
that we know of.
Yeah, and what was written down there is all that anyone in 1921 and for 76 years cared about was that one move right there. To them, seemingly justified every act of brutality that happened next. Yes. And I'm going to be saying that a lot tonight because
it gets worse.
We get worse. Yes, many of the people who were in these mobs were World War I veterans. These were people who knew how to kill and were accustomed to killing. And
World War One, right? Not
World War War One veterans.
I was making sure that you said the right one.
Yeah, World War One veterans. Yeah, we don't have time travelers yet.
That we're aware of.
These people were trained to kill, and many of the survivors, they recall incendiaries being dropped by airplanes.
Wow.
People got into airplanes, made firebombs, and dropped them on various locations.
Th-
They literally treated it like a war.
They literally it was these people literally reverted to to 1917 and just decided, well, we were okay shooting at Germans. I guess we're okay shooting at black people.
it blows my mind because you sum it up really easily. However, there is so much more thought and foresight that needs to go into it. One, they needed to have access to the aircraft or have the wealth to own one. Two, the fact that they made the bombs and the fact that it was not just one or two or three isolated incidents. No, it's like they were just napalming the forests of Vietnam. They were just going back and back.
Yeah, the plane attacks were not coordinated with each other. However, to get into the airplane, to do this, it's not just you're angry and you're running at the people who are 5 feet away from you. You're leaving the area, making a bomb, getting in a vehicle, going into the air, and then instead of attacking the person next to you, are just carpet bombing random houses and buildings that just happen to belong to this one particular neighborhood.
And I think that definitely
these are families too. Like these are children that they do not care like murdering. I mean, they didn't care to like murder a 16-year-old, but like still.
They are dragging people out of this mob drags people out of their homes and executes them in the street in front of their children before doing the same to them. This is to draw an analogy that I know will ring home here. These are the Nazis raiding the Jews. World War II style. This is the same. This is the exact same tactic. Go watch Schindler's List.
Yeah, and it's an atrocity in so many ways, and you could tell that this whole event between Dick Rowland and Sarah Page, it wasn't an isolated incident. This was obviously a ticking time bomb of resentment, of hatred, of I would go as far as to say jealousy, seeing these African Americans prosper in such a way and have such a strong community that to go through and to destroy 10,000 people's homes, 1,400 homes, that is not rioting. That is not like the passion of a mob. That is a level of destruction that just, it's atrocious. This is an atrocity that happened on American soil, and not enough people are upset about it.
Yeah, and it's not the passion mob too, because the passion of the mob does not last for 2 continuous days.
Yeah, this lasted for 2 days of people looting and burning homes and businesses.
Wait, what kind of people?
White people. Sorry, I thought that went without saying. White mob did this.
And to get onto your point there, Justin, this was definitely the outpouring of a lot of, really, by the standards of our time, very much unjustified resentment, as Greenwood really didn't have a major homeless population, didn't really have a major impoverished population, whereas a fair percentage of the people living in the rest of Tulsa, in white Tulsa, did live below the poverty line. So you were poor and struggling to meet ends meet. And you look across, the tracks to Greenwood, and you see people who you believe and are taught and, ardently think should be inferior than you and less than you and have less than you, walking around with diamond rings and fur coats. The evil that you are taught is going to make you hate that. And then you are going to do something truly horrific.
And the part that also just upsets me more than anything is, despite this violence, despite this destruction, the government still dragged its feet. It wasn't until the next day, June 1st, 1921, that the governor was like, maybe there's an issue. I'm going to declare martial law, and deployed the National Guard down to Greenwood, who you would think may have tried to quell things, try and stop the violence.
Oh, no, of course not.
No. And I just want to say, it's not so much that there might be a problem. The problem is not the rioting. The problem is that it's taking too long to kill all the black people. That is the problem that
I
that
shouldn't laugh.
that former governor James
You
B.A.
shouldn't.
Robinson saw when he sent the National Guard into Greenwood. That these people just aren't that efficient at killing.
Yeah, so he didn't send them to stop the rioting. He sent them to disarm and arrest the Black residents of Greenwood. The victims of this
Yeah.
atrocity.
I thought when someone tries to come into your home and remove you from the property or like damage your property, you can, stand your ground. Castle
Yep.
defense law.
I don't think that was set up yet, but
But still,
I mean, we all
castle
know that law
document.
doesn't apply to Black people. That's
Yep.
specifically for
Yeah.
white people.
Yeah.
But
And one of the things I saw, though, I unfortunately did not find a name associated with this, so I didn't put it in the notes. Is one of the churches one of the reasons they sent in the National Guard is in one of the churches, an African American former U.S. sniper set up a sniper's nest in the bell tower to protect the congregation hiding in the churches from the mobsters, or from the mobs. They firebombed the parapet and killed him.
fuck. That is
Um,
intense.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
the
that's
African Americans did try to fight back. They did try to protect their community, which is why the National Guard needed to get called in order to keep the white mob from getting itself murdered.
Yeah, and we literally have in the notes, and I would love you to expand upon this, is they dragged Black residents out of their homes to internment camps by force. Like,
Oh,
this is the
yes.
National Guard.
Yeah, this is the National Guard. They put any African American who survived this was dragged into an internment camp where they were not allowed to leave unless they had the permission of the head of the camp and were accompanied by white people at all times. This included children that these rules applied to. They held, they essentially held 10,000 people against their will, in what I can only describe as a prelude once again to World War II. This time, the Japanese American internment camps. Thank you, President Roosevelt.
Yeah, this is before the
Damn it.
Japanese internment camps, the Jewish internment camps, and it has been noted that the Nazis looked to America and saw what white people were doing to Black people, and they said, we want to emulate that to what we do to Jewish people. Like, that has to be reinstated, and this is just another example of that.
I'd like to say they looked at it and said, "Ah, hell, we can do that better."
Well,
they were very much more systematic about it.
I was gonna say they're really good at optimizing like machines and like systems. I mean, just look at their auto manufacturing processes.
Let's not bring the Ruhr Valley into this, or we're going to actually go into how World War II started.
Yeah.
Let's not bring the Ruhr Valley back into this.
Oh.
Yeah. So once this happened and they rounded them up and put the Black residents into internment camps, the massacre, I guess, officially ends.
Yeah, the
And
massacre finally ended.
Yeah. And the, I believe, official toll at the time that was recorded was 10 white people died and 26 African American people died. Like we said before, experts now believe that it was at minimum 300 people, 300 African Americans that were killed.
Yep. Yeah. 10, to put it in terms of the ours and them, for the people writing these reports, 10 of ours for 26 of theirs. That's self-defense. That's two angry mobs beat each other to death in one night.
Yeah.
As opposed to 10 white people and 300 African Americans. At that point, I think at least one side should have known when to stop.
Yeah.
And
remember, point, these are lowball numbers.
Like, at that point, at the minimum number there is no this was a bar fight and I threw a punch. There is no accidental there is no it was an accident excuse. It is pure malicious intent.
Yeah.
Yep. And my favorite part about the immediate aftermath of the massacre is the state put in a brief inquiry that lasted a incredibly short period of time, and then all the documents involved in that inquiry, they're gone. They vanished. Which means that the people who were expressly putting on the committee to cover up everything that happened found so many things that were illegal and wrong and just downright evil that they couldn't even just have a file for the committee to cover up everything that happened. They had to actively destroy all their evidence.
Yeah.
It was that much wrong that they had that much of a paper trail by the end of the committee.
And obviously, no one involved was ever prosecuted because technically, this didn't happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until 1997 an actual commission was formed.
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead, Justin.
Oh, no, it's all good. It's just they never get prosecuted. There's never anyone at fault, because to prosecute someone, you have to admit that there was a crime committed. And there's no crime committed if you're acting in self-defense.
Yep. Nope.
Quotation marks again.
Yep. And to use your word, Justin, it is commuted when someone is prosecuted. That's when commuted comes in. It either wasn't committed or it was commuted. Legal logic.
Yes, very much.
So it wasn't until 1997 that the Tulsa Race Riot Commission was formed by the state of Oklahoma, and its purpose was to investigate the massacre and to document the incidents.
Yep.
So a lot of the photos that you'll see are from this commission. When you look at photos of the incidents and the documents of survivors and witnesses.
Yeah, and I just want to say, because the dates on this, 1921 to 1997, we do pass over a very important historical period for civil rights in America, which is the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And I think it's important to point out that this was buried so deep that not even the power of the civil rights movement, with figures such as Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., was strong enough to dig it out of the ground and bring it into the fore of public imagination.
Yeah, this commission happened the year I was born.
You sweet
that
child.
is insane. And these two were about one at the time. So
we're being superior to you.
Yes, by a whole year.
What?
Because if there's one thing this video is teaching us, being superior to people based on arbitrary measurements leads to no problems.
I would like to point out, for legal purposes, we are being facetious. This is all in jokes. We're joking about how ridiculous of a thought that actually is.
Yes.
It's a very solemn episode. We
try to lighten it up with some humor, but without trying to be too offensive.
But yeah, so this has kind of been known to more of the public for 20, 24, almost 25 years. That's that's such a short period of time for it to be known when it happened in 1920. And like we said, for a lot of the survivors and witnesses, they were very young children when this happened. So we also have to understand that a lot of survivors did not get to tell their story. Now, some of these have passed down into families and family stories. So that's something that we can at least be happy that we have those. But that's to, keep in mind when we talk about Nazi survivors, a lot of them actually did get to tell their stories, and it did not happen for these residents and these survivors.
And the thing about even the survivors, their accounts and those stories led to a scientific study being done outside of Tulsa's Oak Lawn Cemetery, which they used ground penetrating radar, which we're familiar with our work in archaeology and anthropology, but they actually found what is potentially a mass grave. And the other thing that I find very interesting is this report, this commission, initially recommended $33 million in restitution for these events and to the survivors, and there were 121 survivors.
Yep.
So again,
121 out of 10,000.
Yes.
Yeah.
So very, very small population. But then, again, remember how we said nobody gets prosecuted. No legislative action was taken on this recommendation.
Yep.
And
yeah.
So reparations weren't even really given by the states in the admittance of wrongdoing.
Nope.
Until April 2002, when the Tulsa Metropolitan Ministry paid $28,000 to survivors.
Which is approximately $200 per person. Compared to the $33 million that was recommended by an official commission, and the state was like,
no.
Okay.
And
but do we have to get money involved?
And I will point out too that this money from the Tulsa Metropolitan Ministry, this was not a state or a government organization doing it. This was private donations raised by a church, by essentially the churches of Tulsa saying, hey, we live here. This was evil. What can we give? This was what the private donations from the people of Tulsa could generate for the survivors.
Yeah.
This is not the states. This is, pittance is, what people could get out of the goodness of their hearts, not even what the state should have paid them.
However, the government did do one thing in 2010. What better way to pay homage to such an atrocity than we're going to build a park? And you know what parks do? They reconcile. They constructed the John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Park in the Greenwood district of Tulsa, created to memorialize the massacre.
Now, John Hope Franklin was an amazing person and was a survivor of the massacre. I believe he was about 6 when he survived. He definitely deserves a park in his name, but that is not reconciliation for what happened. For those of you that don't know who John Hope Franklin is, he is an historian and civil rights activist. So his father survived the Tulsa race riots. I believe he was born in 1915.
Yeah. Franklin was born in 1915 and he died in 2009, which means that he did live long enough to, I believe, be interviewed by the commission, by the first investigatory commission. So he did live long enough to tell his story, but it should not have taken 76 years to do so.
No.
Yeah, he was. Yep.
He also developed African American study programs at college and universities. He received the U.S. Medal of Freedom in 1995. Like I said, this was an amazing individual, and the world was lucky to have him. To survive that atrocity. He also had the scholarly reappraisal of the U.S. Civil War and how the Black struggle shaped modern American identity. So, he has a very big impact on modern literature, has a huge impact with the Supreme Court case of Brown versus the Board of Education in 1955. I believe he was on the legal brief for that.
Yep. Yeah. Basically, he was one of the people who wrote up, was essentially the document telling the Supreme Court why segregated schools are unconstitutional, and seeing as how his side won in Brown versus Board of Education, he played a major role in who we have to thank for not having segregation and Jim Crow laws anymore, at least officially in some places. I see some of the redistricting maps that are being done.
Yes.
I see some of those.
We see a lot of the coded laws are still there, but outright, again, he did a lot of good things, a lot of amazing things. He deserves a park in his name. Yeah. But I think they were just kind of using that to steamroll over what actually needed to be done.
He deserves a park for what he did. Tulsa the Tulsa Incident needs its own reparation. And just to jump on something that you mentioned, Gwen, the scholarly reappraisal for the Civil War and Black identity. Basically, this man had the groundbreaking idea, two of them. One, that African Americans are a part of American society and therefore are a part of American culture and identity, because even the act of actively suppressing them is a part of your identity. Number two, this war called the U.S. Civil War, which all original documents from the states that seceded to form the Confederacy and start the war indicate that they were fighting for slavery. African Americans are involved in slavery and thus should be talked about in Civil War, because, the exploited labor that you're fighting a war to keep exploiting kind of plays a part in the politics of that war.
Yeah.
So it's like just, some pretty, what should not be groundbreaking ideas that he forced, he essentially forced America to come to terms with and acknowledge. Yeah, that's actually what the hell was going on.
Yeah. This is great for the literature, kind of something that already needed to be acknowledged, but he was the one to do it. And
he actually managed to force it to happen, and actually force people to acknowledge, wait a minute, there was racism, there's other races.
Wait, Hans, you mean we might be the baddies?
Yes, thank you, dated meme number 1.
If that's only the first dated meme of the episode, we're slacking.
Yeah.
Right. Really quick before we get into some other things, I do want to go over some other people that were survivors and influential. Olivia Juliet Hooker was an American psychologist and professor. She was one of the last known survivors of the Tulsa race riots in 1921 and was the first African American woman to enter the U.S. Coast Guard in February of 1945, and she became an SPAR member of the United States. So, it wasn't just John Home Franklin. There were a lot of amazing people to come from this. Got to give a shout out to George Monroe, who became a musician and an owner of a Tulsa nightclub, but he was also the first Black man to sell Coca-Cola. And here we just have an affinity for this drink. So kind of wanted to talk about that. But yeah, he was one of the people who shared his stories. He was 5 years old during the attack. And just to give you, again, an idea of these atrocities, it is said in his statement that he remembers seeing people getting shot and his own curtains being set on fire by a mob of white men, and recalls hiding under the bed with his older sister when a rioter stepped on his fingers, causing his sister to throw her hand over his mouth to prevent the men from hearing his screams. That is what these children went through during this. It was terrifying.
People being persecuted in their own homes against a violent opponent. And it highlights a series of events, and I think it really should be pointed out that events like this, while atrocious in its own right, is just a string of so many similar stories of African American neighborhoods being burned, being demolished because of things like that. And, it's awful. It really is.
Yeah.
Yep. And just as, sorry, I got a little frog in my throat there. And just as a little bit of housekeeping, with the park, that was Oklahoma's way of saying this incident is behind us, all is forgiven, which they really not what happened, because this really isn't something that you can just move past. With the park, we were talking before this recording about how statues just make everything better, and that is an absolute not at all thing. The park does come with its own statue, the Tower of Reconciliation, a 25-foot tall sculpture that commemorates the African American struggle. Because, $25 million, 25-foot sculpture, same deal.
Yeah.
They're both around 25. Yeah. Like, we're just going to change the zeros a little bit.
It was $25 million in damages. 28 million with the 76 years of interest. Let's just make a 25-foot statue.
I'm sure it'll be more than 28 with interest. If you were to actually do a standard interest rate on the record.
I stay with interest because the preliminary commission found that essentially the state of Oklahoma owed $28 million. And the accounts indicate that $25 million of property was destroyed. And keep in mind, we're just talking about the property. There's also human lives.
Yeah.
So once again, keeping it purely capitalistic over here in my little corner of the video.
You could also factor in loss of income as well, as that is something that people also do when factoring for compensation.
Yep. So, Oklahoma, I am a monster and I won't even pay when I'm getting underbid.
Yeah. Just really quick before, we go on a little, I do want to mention at least one more other person who was a survivor, because I think she also did some great things, was Leslie Benningfield. Oh my gosh, that was so hard to say. Also known as Mother Randall. So she was someone who graduated from the Booker T. Washington High School, and she was part of the active lawsuit with the Greenwood Advocates, which was, is a team of human and civil rights lawyers fighting for the justice for victims and their family. I believe I don't know now, but in 2021, she was still alive with the age of 107. So, hopefully she's still kicking it. But she was also a very influential person, and her story has been recorded many times. I believe still to this day she has nightmares, but she did a lot of great work with advocating for these people and for civil rights.
Yeah. And speaking of just last year of 2021, with the centennial of the Tulsa race riot, the event was finally actually pushed to the fore of American media and memory, and a couple of things were established as a result. The first was a organization called Greenwood Rising, which is a history center specifically on Black Wall Street and Greenwood and the events of Tulsa. And the other was, and this was established by the Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission, which started work on what should be done to make sure that Tulsa is not forgotten again, all the way back in 2015. So this was a 6-year-long project by these people to kind of ensure that the 100-year anniversary of essentially civilian war crimes does not just pass as a little blip on the radar of this country and then be forgotten again.
We love when people forget about historic events like that, but that just
gives us an excuse to tell them.
It seriously emphasizes why these kinds of events and why these topics really do need to be learned about and really need to be talked about, especially to the youth, because so many of them have been repressed or hidden or just downright destroyed. And it's really heartbreaking to hear about these stories of people's livelihoods, their homes, their families being torn apart because of some stupid innate bias or prejudice that is held. And it really boils my blood. And I know we've been standing on a soapbox here for much of this episode, but if it doesn't upset you, then you should reevaluate how you approach these things.
Well, if it doesn't upset you, please point to the part that doesn't, because you clearly have failed to comprehend something.
Well, the part that upsets me is how you portray this one group in this light, and it's like, well, in certain light, certain groups look bad.
It's like, things happen. This was a mob action that was then endorsed by the state of Oklahoma. I mean, come on. There's not a lot of good we can say about some sides here.
And something that also kind of infuriates me is that, Joe Biden, our sitting president, was the first sitting president to acknowledge this massacre, and that was on the 100th anniversary. We've had commissions since 1997.
Yeah.
And no sitting president has actually acknowledged this.
25 years it took.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
And
so yeah,
crazy.
we've had 5 presidents since the 97 commission, including Joe Biden. So, 5 different people had a chance at this.
Yes.
That's about 5 too many.
But this is the point in which acknowledging the event and trying to move on from it while learning, there are serious lessons that can be taken away from these things that can not support divisionism, as a lot of people like to argue about, learning about these critical theories. Yeah. Buzzword.
Yep.
Here we are. You have to put the other word in front of it. Maybe they won't catch it.
Yep. Here. This is as political as we get, and I've counted at least a dozen times in which we could potentially get demonetized. So let's go.
But we're not in this for that. We're here to bring these topics to the forefront and really just try and engage the conversation, bring the conversation to the forefront, because clearly in situations like this, there's still an unresolved ending. They took a look back. They said, yeah, we might have made a mistake. There were some things that happened, but there have been no corrective actions. There's been no reconciliations. A park is virtue signaling at its finest. It's like, look, we did something. No, you chose a name to honor one person. Granted, the person's incredible, but you're not making amends for the wrongs that have been done.
Yeah.
And this is recent history. This is within the past 100 years. It's not like this is some far-off event from 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, there are still survivors today. Like Joe Biden met with Viola Fletcher, Hughes Van Ellis, and Leslie Benningfield, who, we just mentioned. And the fact that to say, the line that could be considered divisive being some injustices are so heinous, so horrific, so grievous, they cannot be buried no matter how people try, which is, something in his speech that some people have a problem with, which is incredible because it was so heinous. And, like Justin, you said move on, and, I don't really think there is like a moving on because we can't even get people to focus on this.
Yeah. And Justin, before I go back to hiding behind numbers and money as a means of coping with the sheer horror I've had to delve into just to learn about this.
You're a guinea pig. You're a parrot in the cage.
Yeah, I am R&D. I am research and development for these topics. So I have read the firsthand accounts.
Colum is our lead research and development officer. Yeah. We'll just keep adding useless titles at the front.
Yeah, keep just adding words to it. I'm going to go back to hiding behind money in a minute. But to put in perspective, Justin, what you're talking about with the park, not being sufficient or anything. The park is, it's putting flowers on the mass grave. The flowers look nice, but they really don't address the fact that you're standing on a freaking mass grave.
And I want to circle back too. This is the reason why we chose this topic for Black History Month, because we felt like it showed a lot of the best and a lot of the worst in these situations. Like it showed the best of this community taking the worst of a previously bad situation of segregation and being in their own insular bubble, how they were able to prosper and how they were able to succeed and garner wealth and fortune, and just the jealousy and the actual racism and hatred that bubbled up and rose to lead to this fireball event and just the cover up. Like, there's a difference between learning from history and trying to cover it up, and just really, it's frustrating. And that's a word that's going to keep repeating the more we talk about topics like this, of how do you just not acknowledge the atrocities? How do you not acknowledge, how do you try and justify these actions? I mean, you could say that, yeah, even if Sarah Page did get assaulted, there's still a justice system in place. The newspaper had no right to schedule a lynching, and they were just trying to fire up the mob, and they did exactly that.
Yeah, and the newspaper, the claim of rape seems relatively unfounded from what sources I found that would actually talk about the claim of rape. Like, I can't say for certain, but it definitely feels like something a very racist writer or editor at the newspaper made up as a false allegation as a means of just inciting violence.
Which I will also point out, this isn't too far off from when yellow journalism really ravaged the country and caused us to go into the Mexican-American War in the 1890s. Yeah. So, like, the media inciting violence and inciting these events is nothing new, even at this point.
Yeah.
And, I mean, even, our current, you use the buzzword of insurrection, but that can also be tied to media as well. And so we have to be really careful of the media we're listening to, especially when it is very favorable in one side and not entirely founded events.
Yeah. And I would like to speak to the resiliency of some of the survivors of Greenwood and of this race riot. As we mentioned earlier, their homes were destroyed. Many of them were killed. They received no compensation, not from insurance companies, not from the government, not from anyone. Yet a number of them did stay in Greenwood and rebuild, and they were able to make a prosperous Black community there again. However, it was never able to reestablish its former glory as Black Wall Street. It never, it didn't turn into a slum. It stayed a decent, at the very least, middle class community, but it never achieved the grandeur it once had.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about resilience. A lot of these people have severe trauma, and yet they've done some amazing things in their lives. People who've literally talked about how they still have nightmares to this day, that they had so much fear going through themselves. And at such a young age, that really imprints. And so it's amazing that they were able to go out and do things and help, further cause for their community.
I mean, that's honestly, so this is getting a little personal for me, but that's one of the things I love about history, and that these situations, because I do try to look for some of the positive sides of things, even in the most horrific situations. And like diamonds that are just carbon compressed, a lot of these people that undergo these severe situations and these really awful conditions end up doing some of the most phenomenal work. Like, these horrible situations, the Holocaust is another example where some of the most outspoken people became who they were because of the situations. And now, I don't wish anyone to go through those situations, but that is one of the most compelling cases of what being a human means, of you go through these adversities and then you fight so nobody else ever has to experience what you experienced. That is,
I feel like we should acknowledge that trauma is also something that really can really harm someone in their capabilities, can really, debilitate them. So we're not saying that they are their trauma, that they're strong for their trauma. I think it speaks to a lot of resilience that these people had to fortify, but there were also people that were debilitated from this trauma, that were scarred, and I don't think they're any less for that. I know that's not what you meant, Justin, but I just really want to reiterate that for people.
I'm highlighting a very specific sect of that group. Well, yes, there are a lot of other people that experienced PTSD, experienced traumatic episodes. Their lives were quite literally ruined because of the event. I mean, we talk about the insurance, we talk about the money. That's a big part, but that doesn't talk about the home life, the people who are lost, the connections, the sense of community, to be
People who were
entirely
separated from their family, you know?
to be ripped away from that at a moment's notice at the drop of a pin. That's enough to set anyone off, honestly.
Yeah. And just really quick, because I think this is really important, I want to give the addresses for some of the museums that you can go and visit in Tulsa to learn more about that, and to hopefully give back to the current community in Greenwood and some of the survivors. So we have the Tulsa Historical Society and Museum, that is at 2445 South Peoria Avenue in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we also have Greenwood Rising, the Black Wall Street History Center, which is at 23 North Greenwood Avenue in Tulsa, Oklahoma. If you guys want to visit or donate or look up some more information, I definitely suggest it, especially during Black History Month, but especially outside of that, because February is not the only month to learn about Black history. It should be all year round.
Yeah, it should be as much a part of regular history as anything else. Not to say there shouldn't, be a distinction there, but like the line shouldn't be there simply because there is no difference in teaching about Black history versus, the history of Europeans. Like it should be taught regularly, just as regularly.
It is very important for us to highlight these situations because they've gone unlearned. So there's a lot of catching up that needs to be done, learning about these Black histories and the people who really made a stand for these events and are the reasons why we still talk about them to this day. Like, it's because of a lot of Holocaust survivors that we still talk about the event to this day.
Yep. Yeah, and because you mentioned the Holocaust there again, and just with all the people, or many of the people who survived Tulsa becoming such major, figures in our history and doing a lot of, very important, work and other things for racial equality and things like that. I just would like to, I personally attribute a lot of that, that transformation to sort of a never again mentality. This is so horrible, it will never happen again. And that does tie into Auschwitz of all places, as it is a sort of a, never again is sort of the hallmark of, why that, that place is kept standing.
Yes.
And it actually comes from a poem by an Israeli poet named Yishtak Lamdan, who wrote "Never Again Shall Masada Fall," in reference to the Roman siege and massacre of Israeli Jews in the siege of Masada. So there's a lot of I don't know. I had a little tangent there that had a lot of history in it, which is what we do here.
Yeah, there's been a lot of tangents and a lot of very politically charged situations, but in an event like this, it's important to bring up and it's important to discuss.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be shied away for not wanting to cause tension, because this is literally something that bubbled over due to tension, and should happen never again.
Yeah,
as Colum referenced.
Yeah, and for those of you who want to learn more about it, we do have, and we will put in YouTube in our description a link to the final report from February 2001 of the Tulsa Race Riot Commission that was established in 1997. That gets into it's legalese, so it's a very dense read. But if you want to look at what they said and exactly why they thought the state of Oklahoma was culpable to the tune of $28 million, that document does go into line by line explaining that.
Yeah.
As is the primary investigatory source for a lot of what we know about Tulsa today.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we also suggest in researching it, actually reading the accounts of these witnesses and survivors, because I think that's really going to give you very visceral reactions of what happened. If like this overview doesn't give you that, and you really want to understand that, I would suggest reading those, because they really do. Again, we make a lot of comparisons. It really speaks to a lot of the Holocaust survivor stories.
Yeah, reading firsthand accounts is probably one of the best ways to humanize the events and to really understand and try and put yourself in the same situation of how would you react in this situation? How would you go about happening? And a lot of people have a lot of knee-jerk reactions when questioned on that or when asked that because they wouldn't react the same.
Yep. And to that end, I would like to encourage people who are listening to check out Tulsa2021.org, which is the website for the Centennial Commission. They have a lot of survivor stories on their site, as well as other important facts about this, tragedy.
But I think that would be a good point for us to wrap up here and to end on that note because, yeah, there's no easy way to end this. There's no easy way to walk away from this topic. It's a very heavy one and it's a very dark one, but it's important to talk about. But if you guys liked hearing about this and you want us to tackle some other topic, some other dark topic, leave a comment. Let us know. Like, we want to hear from you guys as to what you want to hear and what you want to see from us. We're trying to do our best to produce not only the podcast, but also HH Reads episodes and with the short form YouTube shorts and TikToks. Be sure to give us follows on those platforms just so you can stay up to date with what we're doing and what we're working on. And go on.
Yeah, and if there are any other historical events that you don't think are talked about enough or acknowledged, especially with what's happening with our history books right now, please leave it in the comments, and we would love to do a podcast and a story on it, just so that we can hopefully reach it to some more minds, some more eyes, so that it isn't forgotten.
Yeah. Well, and that lovely note, we will see you guys in 2 weeks with the next episode, which will be hopefully just a little bit brighter and a little bit cheerier and not so dark, but we try to mix it up, try to keep things fresh and interesting.
What's the topic for next week? Is it Easter Island?
Yeah, it is Rapa Nui and the Easter Island
Heads. They're
heads,
Easter
yeah.
Island heads. These are not mounds.
No, not mounds. They have a specific name.
We'll get more into that later. However, the colloquialism is Easter Island heads.
Yes.
So that's, more people are going to know what we're going to be talking about. That's what we're going to be talking about.
And that should be releasing closer to Easter. So keep your eyes peeled for that, and we'll catch you all in the next podcast.
Yep.